And yeah, so the difficult thing is, for smaller departments like K-State, Iowa State, how do you increase your budget by 20-30%? I mean, if K-State generated around $100 million in total last year, now you're tacking 20 on top of that. How do you come up with that $20 million? And so, yeah, that's a tricky deal for a lot of athletic departments that aren't SEC Big Ten across the country.
Hello and welcome into another edition of 3Ma. I am John Kurtz, joined today by Cole Manbeck. We do not have Derek Young. Instead, we have our friend Curry Sexton, who is the perfect man to have on today because, look, if you're a college sports fan, I'm sure that you've heard plenty about this. If you're not in the weeds, you probably still have heard about the House settlement. You may not know what exactly it means. We've got the perfect person on the show today to break all of that down. I often joke that, like, these days, if you're covering college sports, if you want to be really down in the weeds of it, you almost have to have a law degree. I mean, I got a comms degree at K-State. No offense to K-State. It's not really cutting it these days for this stuff. But Curry has a law degree, and he's also with Wildcat NIL, so the perfect person to answer all of our questions here, which, of course, calls for a toast from our friends at Holiday Distillery. Get your Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon or your 360 vodka if you're headed out to the lake this weekend. If you're gearing up for the 4th of July, make sure you have plenty of that on hand. Our friends at Holiday Distillery are great K-State folks, so make sure you go out and support them. Curry, appreciate you taking the time to join us here. The House settlement is here. It happened late Friday night. Obviously very surprising to many that it happened at that point. But for those who, look, I could try and give you a quick rundown of the bullet points. Obviously, a big part of this is now revenue sharing that happens between the universities and student athletes. There's a bunch of back pay that's going to be paid to former student athletes, $2.8 billion. But for people who've heard about this, don't know exactly what it is, can you give us just the synopsis, like bird's eye view of what this means now that the House settlement has been approved?
Yeah, it was quite a Friday evening news dump. Especially for those of us who do not live on the West Coast. I think, I was putting my kids to bed, and all of a sudden my phone just starts ringing off the hook with different coaches from campus, and they're all, the news had broke, so they're all wanting to communicate a couple last minute things. But this is the final step in what we've all believed to be coming, which is revenue sharing. And so the House v. NCAA case was initially brought by a former swimmer at Arizona State, Grant House, amongst others, suing the NCAA for back damages for their inability as former student athletes to receive NIL compensation. And so as a part of that case, future NIL compensation through revenue sharing became an important or integral part of the lawsuit. The parties eventually entered into a pretty comprehensive settlement that included $2.8 billion in back pay to former student athletes, as well as structures for requirements for revenue sharing moving forward. And so now with the approval of the settlement on Friday, effective July 1 of this year, so just a few weeks away, about 3 weeks away, schools will be permitted to share revenue with their student athletes. And what that looks like for each school is going to vary. At the Power 4 level, it's going to look a lot different than it's probably going to look at the G5 level and further down. And so in year one, which will be this upcoming academic year, July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026, schools will be permitted to share up to $20.5 million of revenue with their student athletes. So share the money that flows into the athletic department directly with their student athletes, up to $20.5 million. Which is obviously a significant change to the landscape that we've always known, and especially the landscape that we knew 4 or 5 years ago. And so it's a massive change. $20.5 million is a big figure. There are annual escalators in that deal, and now a couple of little nuanced details that can impact that cap are two things. One, if an athletic department makes Alston academic performance payments to their student athletes, that can be reduced from the cap or will be reduced from the cap. And then if schools add scholarships, then additional scholarships up to $2.5 million in costs will reduce that cap as well. So where each school, if schools in the Big 12 and the P4 level are spending at the limit, it's hard. It will be hard to determine what that limit actually is because we don't know what are they doing with Alston and what are they doing with additional scholarships, which are two important pieces to the puzzle here. So a lot of moving parts. I think there's a lot to figure out. The timing of this is really interesting in that the order came 3 weeks before July 1, the effective date of revenue sharing. And so there's, a quick turnaround time here for people to get, to really get the final details in place to get their, structures ready to go.
Yeah. And one of the biggest pieces, the thing that's causing the most, maybe controversy is not the right word, but the most discussion around this and debate is, okay, so CBS Sports ran an article recently about how Texas Tech was in this 40 million club for their football roster this year, right? Like the price of a high-end football roster has gone from last year, people talking about Ohio State, like 25 mil. Now it's 40 or 50 mil if you want to have a roster that competes toward the top of the sport. And we just said, hey, $20.5 million is the revenue sharing cap. So how are you going to get there? Well, the NCAA's idea here, the idea behind all of this is to have a third party, Deloitte, like looking over any NIL deals that go beyond that $20.5 million and determining whether or not they are fair market value. And if it is determined that a deal is not fair market value, you either have to appeal it, which you can do twice, but eventually you would just be ineligible if you took that deal. So the idea is that could make this a little bit more of a level playing field in an ideal world if that all goes through. But there is a lot of debate as to how much teeth that will actually have. And this is where some of the legal side comes into it because people believe there will be lawsuits here. So what's your view on how all of that is going to play out and work here come July 1?
Yeah, I think that's the big, that's the big wild card here is how does NIL go, as it's called, as it's been coined, how does that play out over time? So as a part of this settlement, the parties agreed that they would hire out basically a third party, which is Deloitte, a well-known consulting CPA firm across America, to scrutinize NIL deals that are not part of revenue sharing. So deals that do not come directly from the institution. Those deals, any deal outside of revenue sharing over $600 will be scrutinized or is required to be sent to Deloitte, to NIL Go, for review and for ultimate approval or denial, which is obviously a stark change to what we've seen over the last four or so years where basically anything goes. And so I think there's a lot of skepticism about the ability of Deloitte and of NIL Go to actually rein this thing back in and begin to enforce the rules that they indicate that they're going to enforce. I think one thing that people really struggle with is how does, with 4 years of NIL history in place, how does NIL go? How does Deloitte know what is or is not fair market value? How is that going to be determined? I know they've tweaked the language a little bit recently to talk about reasonable range of compensation, which is still a pretty nebulous term. But how do they have any idea what is or is not fair market value? And then again, the most concerning thing, the thing that I think is going to allow for the most creativity on the athlete agent side is, how do we know that every deal is going to get reported to Deloitte to NIL Go? It would seem that the easiest way to avoid scrutiny from Deloitte is to simply not submit the deal for review or approval. And I can assure you that in the world of college athletics, where under the table activity has been going on for decades, that is going to be a significant issue with Deloitte with NIL Go is the ability to circumvent that process by just simply not even submitting to it. So I think there's a lot of skepticism about that. And I think to your point, John, I think there will be lawsuits. The first time a deal of significant structure or significant, compensation is struck down in probably a larger institution, you're going to see legal battles. So a lot to unfold. At the end of the day, the purpose of NIL Go was to try to curtail some of the third-party donor activity in the private market. So they're trying to, they're hoping that all of that will run through the institutions and through the revenue sharing pool, and that won't continue to happen on the outside so that these roster budgets don't get so significantly out of control. But again, it's because that cat is out of the bag, it's going to be really hard to put it back. And so I think there's just I have a lot of concerns about the ability of NIL Go to step in 4 years after NIL went live and try to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And I guess just one more point on the budgets, the larger budgets, I think we have seen that in this particular cycle, whether it was football 6 months ago in the portal window or basketball and other sports more recently, the budgets, school to school budgets and sport to sport budgets have gotten incredibly high. And I think part of that is, or a lot of that is, schools saw an opportunity to front load these rosters and really amplify the overall budget by, knowing that the revenue sharing was likely coming July 1. They said, okay, we've got 6 months to basically throw as much money as we can at this particular roster. And so most, I would say most Power 4 schools have done that, which has caused these budgets to just go, through the roof. And so I do think some of that will level out a little bit, because it's probably unsustainable for schools to keep spending like they have. But at the end of the day, there are going to be some deals where, the floor isn't dropping. I think there was a quote in the Athletic article, or one of the articles that came out over the weekend. The floor for a Power 5 or superstar quarterback at the Power 4 level is not dropping, no matter where things go with the overall roster budget. So a lot of moving parts here, but really curious to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I mean, Curry, my biggest thought was it's just going to lead to more cheating and under the table deals like we used to see, and with the shoe companies, et cetera. It won't be necessarily the shoe companies here, but there's just going to be a bunch of under the table cash deals where they don't have to go through this. My other concern would be, like, on the reported deals that do get validated through Deloitte, like, is Deloitte actually going to follow up and track that the athlete and the funder of the NIL deal is following through on what they were supposed to do? Like, so if they're supposed to be an X and X number of commercials, through that NIL deal that they validated, how are they going to track that and make sure they're actually following through on the commitment?
Yeah, and that's another huge concern. I mean, I saw Darren Heitner, who's an attorney, probably one of the most well-known sports law, NIL law attorneys in the country. He tweeted out yesterday that, basically, I'm gonna paraphrase, so I may not get this totally right, but the gist of his message was the easiest way to avoid, real scrutiny from NIL Go is to just to in the services provision of the contract, just include an incredibly lengthy list of services to be performed by the athlete, all of which may never be performed, but Deloitte's not going to be, quality. Yep. They're not going to be QC checking that down the road. They're just going to look at the contract for what it is and say, is this approved or is it not? And so, in addition to the point I brought up earlier of, people just aren't going to submit deals to NIL Go, that's the other point, is people are going to submit them, but the contracts are just going to be beefed up so that they can't be shut down.
Yeah, they're going to overinflate on the promises there with the commitments made, and then know that there's really no way to really track and follow through on that, unless they hire another agency to do that as well. Curry, we were texting about this actually on Friday night when it got signed, and Kendall Rogers, actually from D1 Baseball, called my attention to this when the deal was signed. He tweeted at 9:45 p.m. Friday, quote, that the next 2 hours and 15 minutes are a wild time in the NIL space. Any new deal executed after midnight on June 7th and after has to be approved by the clearinghouse, and any payments for pre-existing deals made after July 1 will have to be approved as well. Now, I understand the first component of that, but what I was texting you guys about was, payments for pre-existing deals made after July 1, that does not make sense to me. It spells disaster for a variety of reasons. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so they're trying to say that everything that exists after that July 1 date basically is part of this revenue sharing world, and therefore has to go through the scrutiny of NIL Go. And this is something that people have known about for quite some time, and it's why this front loading of budgets for the 2025-2026 academic year has been so, has gotten so out of hand, because people have known that, okay, if we can pay out whatever we want by June 30 without the scrutiny of NIL Go. And so that's been the approach. So yeah, again, struggle with it conceptually, but it's not a surprise to anybody. I also struggle with this idea that though the revenue sharing doesn't take effect till July 1, the clearinghouse took effect on Saturday morning, or I guess at midnight on Saturday morning. So I struggle with that a little bit, but yes, to his point, to Kendall's point, I was telling John before you hopped on, that was, Friday night, I guess I might've said this in the outset. I was putting the kids down and started getting a lot of calls from different coaches, and guys in our group started getting calls from different coaches. And And so there was a little bit of a last minute effort here on our campus for coaches to use up any sort of remaining pre-revenue sharing budget to lock guys in for a, June 30 payment. So, we're not immune to that. That's something that we've done strategically, as well as, like I said, probably every other Power 4 school in the country, because it is a competitive strategic advantage. And if you're not doing it, a competitive strategic disadvantage. And so, there was some scrambling on our campus on Friday evening to try to get some last minute deals signed. Especially, Kendall Rogers brings it up in the baseball context. The baseball season just ended. The portal season just opened. And so this, our staff is just figuring out, what things look like for them after they lost in the regional. And so that was a staff that was, really trying to put some last minute things together so they could get out in front of this thing.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting from a recruiting standpoint, like guys right now that are going through the recruiting process, like in the 2026, 2027 class in high school, how this impacts them, because there's probably less of a share that they can make now that other guys in the past cashed in on.
And that's the tricky part, right? It's hypothetically, yes, because of this front loading, everybody's share is bigger than its revenue share will be. If the revenue share is, is this big, the pre-revenue share, revenue share amount combined is this big. And so if you believe in the settlement, then everybody's overall share is going to be reduced as a whole. Which is, I think, going to be really, really difficult for some people to grasp or to accept. I saw an article from I can't remember which source it was. It was a tweet of some sort. It was about revenue sharing. It's about the University of Michigan, and they said that Ward Manual had come out and said that 75% of their revenue sharing dollars were going to be committed to football, as you would expect at a school like Michigan. Well, and then if you assume 15 or 20% is going to the men's basketball program, I guess do you believe that that staff who's did some really nice things in year one, do you believe that Dusty May is going to say, okay, we may have had $10 million in the portal this year, and next year we're going to have $4 million? Okay, that's good. That sounds great. I don't think it strains credulity to say that they're not going to accept that. They're not going to say, okay, yeah, I'll shave my budget in half when I know that, whether it's KU, some of these other blue bloods in the basketball sport are not going to shave their budgets because they're going to continue to do things on the outside. That's the part that I think people are completely overlooking is coaches, especially basketball, where things are as wild as anywhere else in the sport, are not going to say, yeah, we'll shave our budget by 60% because we think everybody else is going to play by the rules. That's just not how it's going to work.
But man, that's such a good point on basketball. Like, basketball has been the biggest free for all of anything here, and they're going to be the ones that stand to get squeezed the most by all of this. That's crazy. Okay, well, I'm going to ask, we're going to take a break here, but I do think one of the big questions here, a lot of people may be like, okay, like I get this, I get how this is all crazy and a lot of the ramifications here, but what exactly does that mean for K-State? So we'll ask Curry that coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Folks, it's playoff time, and if you're still just watching games, then you're missing out. With Pick 6 from DraftKings, you can turn your hoops knowledge into real cash. Just make your picks, track your score, and if you hit all 6, you're looking at bigger payouts than Prize Picks flex plays. Nobody's dropping better payouts than Pick 6. Hit 6 picks, and that's 25 times your cash. And if you beat your competition, you could be looking at a 500 times bag in your pocket. And right now, new customers can get $50 in bonus picks with just a $5 entry. Here's what you got to do. The playoffs are on, so why not take a shot at making a little money while you're watching? Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to play $5 and get $50 in bonus picks. Better payouts, bigger wins, only on Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 bonus picks that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. Terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
So I'm going to set the context of all this with the backdrop of, like, there's been a lot of talk in the Big 12 about Texas Tech and BYU, because Texas Tech has a multi-billionaire booster in Cody Campbell, who's gaining a lot of power in the sport in general right now. And then BYU, because of the LDS Church and really like a global fan base, I mean, they have a lot of money to throw around as well. They got AJ DeBonsta, number 1 basketball player in the country coming in. Texas Tech just landed the number 1 portal class in football. Are we set up for a world where the Big 12 is going to be run by Texas Tech and BYU because they have this kind of backing? And as that relates to K-State, like, where does K-State fit in all of this? Like, what? I know that's a really broad-based question with all these different, and it's impossible to predict exactly how this is going to go. But if I just asked you, like, what does the House settlement mean for how K-State will be able to compete long-term moving forward? What's your feel on that right now?
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of 2 parts to that answer. One is, I think in a revenue sharing world where the rules as written are enforced, I think you feel really good about where we stand, because Gene has always made it clear that we're going to be aggressive and that we're going to maximize, we're going to spend up to the cap, which is not something that not every other school in the Big 12 can say. So that already puts you in a strong position. If you, on the flip side, we've talked a lot about how we believe that the enforcement of these limitations is going to be difficult. If you believe that there is going to continue to be outside activity, then I think the answer depends on, what does that activity look like? Is it under the table, or is it legal once, if the Deloitte situation goes away? And if it's legal, then I think you probably feel pretty good about it. If it's legal to kind of spend outside the cap through donors, it's probably, I think you probably feel good about where we stand. If it's illegal, I think you just have to, it all will come down to what's the palate of our administration, of our donor base, to engage in some of that under the table activity that we know is going to be going on, that has been going on for decades. Historically, that's not something that K-State has delved off into, but things have changed, I would say, fairly significantly over the last 4 years. And so what does the appetite of our donor base look like to supplement that revenue sharing budget above and beyond that quote unquote cap?
Do you think, and whether or not this is K-State or just other schools, but Jamie Pollard raised the idea of hey, $20.5 million is really hard to come up with every single year. We may need I think it was Virginia Tech that's done an extra student fee that is helping pay some of that. Or obviously a lot of the other talk is you have places I think the Arizona schools are both subsidized pretty heavily by the university. Is that something that you're going to see come into play with a lot more schools, because it's just really hard for an athletic department to think about that, a new line item that's $20.5 million every single year and growing, by the way. 100%. We had Gene on, and Gene was just hey, that's going to grow every year, by the way, too.
100%. I think in year, again, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think in year 5 or so, within the next 5 to 10 years, that number is going to be up in the 30 million range, or in excess of $30 million, just to show how quickly it's going to grow. And yeah, so the difficult thing is, for smaller departments like K-State, Iowa State, how do you increase your budget by 20-30%? I mean, if K-State generated around $100 million in total last year, now you're tacking 20 on top of that. How do you come up with that $20 million? And so, yeah, that's a tricky deal for a lot of athletic departments that aren't SEC Big Ten across the country. And so, yeah, what support can you get from campus? I think for the past, really since the John Curry days at K-State, we've always prided ourselves on the fact that we are one of very few Power 4 athletic departments that is completely standalone, completely self-sufficient. Well, now how does that, now do you still feel good about that? Or would it be nice to have some support from campus? I think every school is going through that analysis right now, is what can campus do for us? Can we add in some student fees? Can they just kick us some dollars year over year? And I know that's a conversation that's being had everywhere across America, which I guess, again, depending on the place, is not that the answer to that isn't always a simple one. It's not always an easy yes. Universities are struggling in a lot of places. Enrollment has capped or has even begun to reduce in different places across America. And so with campuses struggling a little bit, I think it's really hard for them in some cases to say, yeah, we'll chip into that pool over there. And so just tricky analysis here. Now, at the end of the day, here, if you ask me, and I think people on the athletic side of the deal would probably agree with this. At the end of the day, a university athletic department is truly its front doorstep. It is the entry point to the university, and without success of primarily football, but other sports as well, that university, I think data will show, will struggle. And with success, with conference championships, college football playoff appearances, that enrollment is only going to increase, and the success of that university is only going to grow. And so the hope would be that campus administrators would look at that particular point and say, yes, I believe that we need to be strong and that we need to have success in order for us to have success over here on campus. And so, yes, we will help you. We will do our part in helping, ease this burden, but it's not always that easy or that simple of a discussion. And so we'll be interested to see how that bears out from campus to campus.
Yeah, I mean, it was always former President John Weefald at Kansas State, Curry, that recognized that football and K-State athletics was the front door to a university and how important that was as well. By the way, it was ESPN had an article, a sports economist, Daniel Rasher, a subject matter expert who was used in the settlement process. He wrote that he expects that the revenue sharing pot will grow to more than $30 million per year by the time the deal expires. So you were right on there. Also that ESPN article that I read from Pete Thamel over the weekend, Curry noted something you brought up earlier, and those that have shared their budget estimate for what they're going to give via sports, 90% of their money will go to football and men's basketball. So to the point that you made earlier on the men's basketball front, the other thing that's unique about this is we've seen quite a rise in the popularity of women's sports and college athletics in recent years. Just watch Kennedy, a Topeka native, star for Texas Tech, got a reported $1 million NIL deal to transfer to Tech from Stanford. It feels like this is going to particularly impact athletes in those sports for schools that have football that they also have to fund, et cetera. And there's going to be less of a pot to give to women's athletics when we saw the rise in that and all these bigger deals going out. What are your thoughts on that? How do you view it?
100%. And again, school to school, that's going to look a lot different. I think, K-State, and don't quote me on this, but I believe Gene Taylor's intention is to divvy up a percentage of the cap to every sport. So every sport will get something. Obviously, that's going to, is going to disproportionately affect positively men's basketball and football. But some of our non-revenue generating sports are going to receive a sliver of that cap. Whereas at other schools, they may be supporting 2, 3, 4, 5 sports in total. They may be going football, men's and women's basketball, and that's it. Or maybe a couple other baseball, volleyball, whatever it may be. So there are sports at schools that are not going to receive anything in a revenue sharing world. And so, yeah, I mean, to my point earlier, Nyjah Kennedy, got $1 million deal this year. Obviously she's a household name at this point, but if Texas Tech's softball NIL budget is, I guess just think, let's say it's 1% of that cap. So if it's $200,000, even if they spend 100% of that on Nyjah Kennedy, do you believe that she's going to accept a pay cut of that nature? And do you think that other schools are going to say, yeah, we won't do more than that. We can't do more than that. No, of course not. That's just not the way this world is ever going to work. Texas Tech's not going to pay her the $1 million that she got this year. Somebody else is going to pay her the $1 million. So that's the tricky part of this thing is again, how do individual sports, how do they accept these reductions in available dollars? From a revenue sharing perspective, how is that accepted by them, by their supporters, other things of that nature. So it's tricky. They're just, again, there's so many considerations from every single sort of sub issue that you look at. And I think, again, it all comes back to, for me, the conclusion is just, it's going to be really, 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 really difficult for this cap to ever serve as any sort of cap.
Yeah. Like you guys and Wildcat NIL and Gene Taylor and K-State Athletics, you've been bracing for this revenue sharing agreement for several months. I mean, I remember us talking at the end of football season about you guys working with K-State in preparation of this. I know you guys have been fully prepared for this to occur, but for folks who are maybe Wildcat NIL members who want to give to Wildcat NIL or have questions about this, what would be the message to them kind of moving forward?
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, we need at K-State, and every other school would echo this, I'm sure, we need as much NIL support as we can possibly get. And I know that's tough to hear sometimes because of, hey, I keep hearing this $20 million number, which is obviously a significant number. But if for all the reasons that we've discussed, how this cap is probably never going to serve as a cap and is probably more so going to serve as a floor, we need as many NIL dollars as we can to make sure that we are as competitive as we can possibly be. And so I guess if you look at the, again, we keep talking about if the Deloitte mechanism works and if it doesn't, well, either way, we are going to need additional dollars. And so I guess, Wildcat NIL is going to continue to be around. We're still trying to iron out the final details on what exactly that looks like in terms of our official partnership with K-State Athletics. But at a minimum, sourcing third-party deals is going to be an important part of what we do. Coming up with those legitimate NIL activities to support our student athletes is going to be an important part of what we do, because raising that floor is going to be the name of the game. How do we come up with as many dollars as possible? And so we'll be around in that capacity. I expect, at this point, I expect that our membership will likely continue to stay around through our partnership with K-State. So if you're a Wildcat NIL member, continue to support that. If you're not, go get signed up. And then, if this enforcement mechanism, if NIL Go isn't as successful as people hope that it will be, then we will continue to be there to assist in the event that things do go back to the previous model of what some people call the Wild Wild West. And so again, we're going to continue to be around. It's important that we continue to provide additional support for our athletic department, for our coaches, and for our athletes, so that we can all have the success that we've enjoyed over the last 30 or so years at K-State. And I say this, and I talked about this with Gene on Thursday. There are a lot of people who struggle with NIL, and I completely understand that, especially people who come from different generations where, they're just used to the old model. That's completely fair. And there are a lot of people who are hesitant to support K-State or NIL because of that feeling. And I 2 points to that. One is there are other needs at K-State, at K-State Athletics beyond NIL. There are other needs, including, just operational needs, salary need, all of that. There's so many other needs. And so there's a way to support without necessarily supporting NIL. And the second piece of that is, what we do with this, what we do with how we attack NIL, how we maneuver through this new era of college athletics is going to dictate what Kansas State, what Manhattan looks like in 10, 15, 20, 30 years. The college realignment is not done. There is going to be continued change in college athletics. There's going to be continued realignment. If we struggle with the revenue sharing piece, if we struggle to have success in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, but again, primarily football, then when that next round of realignment comes, we're not going to end up where we want to be. Now, if we go on a run of, a couple Big 12 titles, couple CFP appearances over the next several years, then when that next round comes, we're going to be in a pretty darn good spot. And we don't do that without strong support for our athletic department and for NIL as a whole. And so I guess I charge people with, just the question of what do you want, where do you want K-State, Manhattan, Kansas to be over the course of the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades? And if the answer is you want it to continue to be a growing and vibrant community and for this campus to continue to be a growing and vibrant campus, then the answer is a pretty simple one.
Yeah, it's a great answer, because I think like a lot of people maybe have had their head in the sand, and I understand that, by the way. Like this, those things, like it's not like a fun thing to follow. It's not a good system. There's not been a good entity of leadership at all here. There's kind of a power vacuum right now, and everything's being swept up by, Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, who just met with the president yesterday, by the way, is probably the most powerful guy in college athletics. Like, it's not a fun environment, but that is the cold hard reality about K-State and what you want here, because conventional wisdom right now suggests that right around 2030 is when you're going to see the next big round of either realignment, or is it moving to some sort of super league? That's when you'll have a lot of change, because that's when TV deals are going to start coming up. So you got to do everything you can right now to compete until 2030. And I think, Curry, when you were talking about trying to have people wrap their mind around, okay, there's $20.5 million, but we still need more. The way you have to look at it is $20.5 million is table stakes. Like, if you want to get into the poker game, you got to have $20.5 million to be there and be in a Power 4 conference and be legitimately competitive. It doesn't guarantee you anything, and you're going to need more. But just to even be in the game, you need the $20.5 million. And so I think that's the best analogy you could throw out there to
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And again, it's a tough, I completely reason with people who don't love it. I think most people don't love where we're at. And that's again, a totally fair position. I think our coaches and our administrators would tell you they don't love where we're at, but that doesn't change the fact that where we are right now is reality. And that reality is revenue sharing is a significant part of where we're at, where we're headed. And again, if we're not as competitive as we can possibly be, then it's not going to serve us well over the long run. And that's not meant as a message of doom and gloom, but one of, hey, if we look at this through the lens of how can we use this as a competitive advantage, I think we'll find that it's going to, the outcome will be a good one for Kansas State.
Maybe to tap into your legal knowledge here, I know some of this is going through Congress, so that's impossible to predict as well, but there is this big push, and I think Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC, and then Pete Bavacqua, who's the AD at Notre Dame, both met with Donald Trump yesterday, and I think the idea there is, in light of the House settlement, they're trying to push for, we need some kind of congressional help to codify everything that's in that House settlement so we can't get sued all the time for what's coming there. Like, how realistic do you think it is that they could get some legitimate help there, and like what could that actually do? Like, what would be the difference if they get it versus if they don't get that help?
Yeah. So I think, at this stage, I think, uniform legislation from Congress would be welcomed. But it is incredibly unlikely. I mean, we have been, NIL took effect, the NIL world took effect almost 4 years ago to date. July 1, 2021, and there have been countless bills proposed on both sides of United States Congress, and none of them have received much traction. And that's because those bills are just so different in nature. I mean, you have some, on one side of the aisle that may be pushing for lifetime health care or employment classification. I mean, pretty extreme examples. And on the other side, you may have examples that are trying to just bring things back to where they were 5 years ago and really restrict the student athletes. And so I think it's really hard for people from different sides of the aisle to get on even remotely the same page. And so because of that, I think the chances of anything happening are very, very, very remote. Now, I will say, Ted Cruz has been really involved in this space from the beginning, and is really an advocate for trying to get something done. And with the way the election shook out, he became the head of the Senate Commerce Committee, And so this is an important priority of his. And so I do think it's something that is going to get more attention with him running the show in the Commerce Committee than maybe if somebody else is running the show. But at the end of the day, I just don't know that that's a viable possibility. And I guess back to my earlier point of why would this be welcomed? And I guess we can look at NIL as it stood, 5 days ago, and NIL as it will stand effective July 1. The problem with what we've seen in this NIL era is we've had little to no guidance or we've had little to no legislation from whether it's the NCAA or now this House settlement that they're trying to legislate through. And so what that's forced individual states to do is go out and enact state laws that somehow circumvent the existing structures. And so we saw, again, in the previous world, I'm talking about NIL prior to revenue sharing. We saw states enacting statutes that basically allowed them to, Missouri was on the cutting edge of this. 2 or 3 years ago, Missouri passed a law that allowed them to revenue share effective, I believe it was, August 22 or August 23. And so they started revenue sharing, way before everybody, was forced to start revenue sharing. And so many other examples of states doing things to basically limit or prevent the NCAA from enforcing its own rules and the rules that those schools have voluntarily agreed to associate with. And now you see the same thing happening with revenue sharing coming down the pike. You see states starting to enact laws. The state of Tennessee enacted a law that says that it does not have to abide by the rules of the House settlement, which is just, completely contradictory because its schools in the SEC conference are signing to adhere to the terms of that settlement. But again, it comes down to this issue of, which rules govern the rules of a particular state, a sovereign state, or the rules of a voluntary athletics association. And I think a lot of people from a legal perspective will take the position that, hey, I'll take my chances with the state law all day long over the NCAA. And so I think you're going to continue to see schools push the issue or states push the issue with individual state laws, which is going to undermine the strength of the House settlement, which already in my mind stands on somewhat feeble legal ground. And so that is why at the end of the day, uniform legislation would be very, very welcome from my perspective, because it would at the very, very least, it would establish some uniformity across the board, which we have not had since July 1 of 2021.
Yeah, didn't I see the state of Texas just did one of those last week too?
Mm-hmm.
So So for Big 12 fans, have fun with that. Obviously,
and I think the state of I think it was Louisiana. The state of Louisiana just passed a bill, or their House just passed a bill where they're increasing the tax on sports gambling dollars, and then a percentage of those tax dollars from sports gambling in the state have to go to athletic departments of certain institutions in the state. And that's not exactly a circumvention of House settlement, but it is ways that states are getting creative with how they source dollars. Because as we talked about, sourcing $20.5 million for most athletic departments is not an easy lift. And so there's what has been implemented through this settlement, what has been, the attempted legislation efforts through this settlement is just going to, again, be eroded by the activity that takes place from this point moving forward, and B, all of these state laws that you're going to see get enacted and then revised and enacted again as states get more and more aggressive. And so it's without federal legislation, nothing is going to be set in stone for very long.
Yeah, boy, that's fascinating. The gambling piece of that, I had not heard that from Louisiana.
Brilliant.
Boy, somebody get that idea to Topeka, please. Let's
no kidding.
Let's get that going. All right. Well, if you're not sufficiently confused, I think we did a pretty good job explaining all of that. But I'm sure you can see that it's kind of a mess, everybody. So that's welcome to college athletics. Go Cats.
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, it is a mess, and I think from this point forward, you're going to see Gene and his staff making a strong effort to try to get out and answer people's questions and help people understand the world that we live in. And if you're somebody out there who has questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our athletic department, to Gene Taylor. If you would like to reach out to our group, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, this is something that we're better off if we all understand the task at hand rather than if we believe everything that we read online and choose not to support because of that. At this stage, our athletic department, our programs need your support more than ever. And so, if you truly love K-State, I think, find a way.
Yeah. That's a great message, Curry. And hey, 2 months from now, we'll be talking actual football together.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Cannot wait. In August, we'll have Curry back on for the weekly shows to
That's why I was
say football.
Well, Cole, I was saying last night on my YouTube show, I was like, dude, I remember in June, like even like 5 years ago, doing the radio show in June, we'd be talking about like, what's the backup right guard situation right now? And instead we're talking about with all of this. Like, I mean, it's crazy how much it's changed in such a short period.
Yeah. And there's no downtime in college athletics. There's always chaos. And so, yeah, until we get back to a position where there's a central body that has some ability to govern, it's going to continue to be chaos.
Yeah. It's catsnil.com, right? People want more information there. All right. Get to catsnil.com if you want more info. Obviously, kstatesports.com as well. Get in touch with Gene and company. But Curry, we really appreciate it, man. This was awesome. Thanks for everything that you do, not just for us here with the content, but everything you're doing for K-State. We really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks, fellas. Appreciate you guys.